comparing sort of digital art with traditional art.
The preparation starts way before the canvas.
There's as much fun to be had potentially doing digital work for people.
Collaborating, but kind of to a degree face to face or goggles to goggles. Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Sketchwave, the weekly show where we talk all things digital art, Procreate, because we are both Procreate shooters here on YouTube, releasing weekly content on our channels. My name is Joel, otherwise known as JoelCreate here on YouTube, and my co-host is the one and only James Julier. James, how has your week been since we last spoke?
It's been a busy one. Finally moving this Friday. It's been months and months and months in the making. Lots of delays.
So exciting.
Big headache. But yeah, this Friday is finally happening. So yeah, it'll be a different background, I think, next time we film this. Yes, it will be. But yeah, it'll be what it will. It'll be a bit messier. I mean, it's already messy here off camera. We had a discussion about chaos off camera. It very much is like that at the minute. In the new house, I'm hoping it'll be a bit more organised. Yeah, in time. How was your week?
My week's been good. Now, just spoiler alert in case we discuss anything. I have finished Game of Thrones. I know. It came out years and years ago, but we've only just started watching it and we flew through it and we've just finished it. So, yeah, lots to digest because if no one's watched it or they're planning on watching it, just skip ahead for a minute. We're not going to talk too much about specifics of it or get into it too much. But I think because we binged it and we were flying through it, we watched 3 episodes so 3 episodes left. So we watched until the big war, the Great War, and then we had to turn off. So we went to bed like wide awake, thinking, "How is this happening? Like, what's happening? What's going to happen?" And then we had obviously the ending that everybody spoke about a lot. So, I think because we binged it, there wasn't enough time in between episodes to digest like everybody else did and be like, that wasn't really up to standard or whatever.
Anticipation up, too much.
Yeah, just whereas one episode at a time, you would be able to break it down and be like, how have they done that already? Or how did they get there? Why did she do that? And so I'll talk to you about it off air anyway, just in case anybody is making their way through it. I don't want to ruin it for anyone. But other than that, a good week in terms of since we last recorded. I must admit, this week I'm very creatively just really blocked. Like, just every time I try to access my creativity in my mind today especially, it's just like no. And I don't know if it's feeling a bit lethargic from the weekend or anything like that. Not that I did anything heavy or anything, just feeling a bit meh, and I can't access it. So hopefully tomorrow's a different day.
Lots of changes in your life recently as well, isn't there, on that front? So, catches up with you, doesn't it, after a while?
It definitely does. My lower back is telling me every single day. We've got a cool topic to talk about this week. Yeah. As always, we're going to split the show into 2 segments. We're going to talk about our main topic, which you can see from the title, which is comparing digital art versus traditional art. And of course, then taking a look through our previously released tutorials. So if you want to watch all the way through, join us for the conversation. Otherwise, there's chapters below if you'd like to jump ahead. James, do you want to kick us off with this topic? Because it's something I'm back to you this week, and you come back with an absolute barrage of bullet points for me to go through. So hopefully we stay in the running order this time.
It's a topic that there's always been quite an important one to me in the way that I think creatively. And that is comparing sort of digital art with traditional art, and what are the differences, and the pluses, minuses, and other considerations, really. One thing I've not really spoken to you much about to begin with is, do you have much of a traditional art kind of experience? I know we both come at this from the digital perspective. I know that I did, I pipe on about this a lot, but being older, there was many years when there was no other option. There was only traditional work. The digital side of stuff didn't exist. But I don't imagine that's quite the same for yourself. I mean, have you jumped straight to the digital, or have you done a lot of traditional too?
Well, I mean, when I was in secondary school, so that would have been 04 to 09, is I guess maybe it's because it was the come up of actual like digital programs and computers in general anyway, and they
Mm.
just piqued my interest. I think it was like painting prior to that, so quite a young age, and not really with any sort of focus other than just enjoyment and just a little bit of fun
Yeah.
here and there with grandparents, as I've mentioned before. It was a little bit more leaning towards the digital side of things, just simply following all of the programs. Like I used to use like GIMP back in the day as well. Photoshop, I still use that every
I've
single
not
day
heard of
for
GIMP.
work. So yeah, it's a free program, graphic interface manipulation program. I think
Right,
it
okay.
stands for. Yeah,
Dodgy name,
it's
but
not just
yeah.
an abusive name for
No.
software, but it's a free piece of software that I think is still kicking about now. But no, not quite so much in the traditional for professional purposes or anything like that, or educational purposes,
For
other than a
fun?
little bit the GCSEs, and yeah, a little
Okay.
bit of fun more than anything.
Yeah. So whereas, as I was saying, for lots of years, I was doing predominantly traditional stuff, and it was only quite late well, I'm not late in the day, but I certainly had a good kind of portfolio of traditional work under my belt before I even started to do digital work. Um, yeah, so in terms of that experience, I kind of want to discuss what's the impact of perhaps the first point. What is the impact of choosing to work digitally or traditionally, and how does that affect the creative process? I mean, do you notice that although perhaps you haven't done as much traditional work, I'm sure that there'll be situations where you have. I'm sure. Um, do you find there is an impact on the actual creative process? Technically, clearly, there's going to be, but in terms of how you generate ideas and things like that, or the outcomes, do you find that there is a difference for you personally?
Well, I mean, I don't. I guess this topic, in a sense, doesn't fully require too much in terms of traditional background. I guess you
Mm,
could argue it's also the topic kind of focuses, from my perspective, a little bit more on I guess, the pros almost of digital art
yeah.
against traditional. So that's like a little bit where I'll kind of try and sort of angle my thoughts towards. I guess the impact more so would be the process is quite very different sort of in terms of the fact that you can go through probably multiple iterations in
Hmm.
digital art form very quickly and not give any thought to it without having to sacrifice resource potentially as well at the same time. Let me back that one straight back to you, and I'll sort of run through these points, I think, and direct them at you in terms of the flow of it. But what would you say is the impact of the differences between, so the impact of digital versus traditional?
I think for me personally, it steers me more towards. It's not entirely true, but it's easier to paint certain subject matter in digital, whereas in traditional it becomes a real headache. For example, creating glow and creating really strong light sources and really saturated colors, and playing around with different color schemes with digital is a much easier prospect than it is with traditional paint. You kind of, it's not entirely so, but a little bit of pre-thought is usually required with traditional work. If you're going to put, for example, I've done like 5 paintings in the past, and I'll show a couple of images now. One of them is the traditional oil painting on canvas. It's quite a big canvas. Um, and I had to start in a very different way. I started with sort of really light yellows on a white canvas and just built it up and went to oranges, went to reds, went to dark reds, went to kind of almost black colors, and then started adding cool colors on top of the black. And so a totally different process and different thought process than was required or would be required with digital. Um, and so it does affect not only the approach, but inevitably the outcome, because I think I'd be more inclined to stick and leave more, in that example, more of the light remaining on the canvas, because once you've eliminated the light, you can't get it back again with traditional very easily. Once you've blotted out the white of the canvas and you're trying to get that intense glow, then it's kind of gone. The second example is the digital kind of reworking of the same composition. So it wasn't intended to be exactly the same at all, but I took it a lot darker. In fact, it started darker. I started with a dark kind of undertones really, and then started to bring out the light as not an afterthought, but as the secondary phase in that. So it started quite a dark composition, blocking out the main forms, and then building up the light within it, because I knew I could. I can go over it as much as I want to build out the light components, for example. And so it changed the way of approach. But not only that, I think when you're doing digital work, then you can afford to make mistakes and you don't worry too much.
Mm.
Like I was saying on the
That
original. Go on.
No, that's exactly where I was going to lean towards this point as well. Is that there's arguably with the two different mediums is one has far more risk
Yeah.
and potentially could have no reward, whereas the other one you can be like, boom, okay, I'll try this, I'll try this, I'll try this.
Yeah.
I think how many times I go to, I'll simply go into my layers and create a new layer right at the top. I'll copy it all, paste whole version of your design at the top, so you don't destroy any of the layers underneath, and then just go to the the curves slider. I think it's curves, where you can adjust then the shadow tones, the mid tones, and the highlight tones, and just chaotically almost have fun trying to explore different avenues and different sort of final touches. But in that traditional sense, you'd be undoing the direction that you've been quite tunnel visioning in a sense to get to with your final result, and also the risk of then destroying so much of the sharp detail in there. Because you're right, you're saying that the yellowy version is the first version you did, the traditional version, and the red one. See, I can see a difference as well in the sharpness.
Yeah.
Because I think because you've got less room to explore and go down different avenues, your main focal point of the element there towards the center of the screen, there's so many sharp edges in there that almost because you're in that phase of adding highlights, and that potentially the limitation of the fact that you're using a physical paintbrush, you're adding in a bold stroke rather than a softer, pressure sensitive, probably soft airbrush stroke in there. So
it was before
it
the
almost
Apple
forces
Pencil,
you to be a
actually,
bit harsher.
that digital painting. It was before the iPad Pro and the Apple Pencil.
I see, now you're just showing off. This is wow. Okay, fair enough. That adds a whole different level.
It did have pressure sensitivity though, because it was the Wacom. I've spoken about this. It was the Wacom creative stylus, I think it was called, and it had a rubber tip on it, and it had batteries, and it would kind of give you a pressure sensitivity. So there was that to it, but it wasn't as precise because it was like using the end of your finger to draw with, basically. A little bit more precision than that. So, but yeah, it was one of the first digital pieces that I produced as a kind of test to see how it would change it. And another element that I think affects the creative process is that you don't necessarily need to have any idea with digital work what you're going to do ahead of time. Not only in terms of like what colors do you need to put down first, but even the overall composition. You can just start with some squiggles and some doodles and lines, and then you can transform it and rearrange it and put it onto a different part of the canvas or crop the canvas. Whereas in traditional work, I think just the fact it's so difficult to remove it, or to if you spend any length of time invested in a detail and then to move it to another part of the canvas just means you'd have to destroy it and do it all over again. And even if you could do that without it showing through, is just such a pain. Whereas in digital, it's just easy, and I think it means that you can take more risk, like you say. You can experiment more. Gives you a freedom to not worry so much, not be so timid, because you can go back as long as you kind of like structure it so you've got lots of layers, for example. Any previous details are on a different layer, then that's fine, isn't it? But I think it gives you a lot more bravery and try different things, which is a good effect on the creative process, I think.
Oh, for sure. I think, but also traditional for me, the preparation starts way before the canvas.
Yeah.
The preparation is thinking of an idea 2 days before you even commence the work, and then going to the shop and going, well, I know what the vibe I want to go for, but I do need a particular crimson color. I need to go grab that paint if we're talking about paint, or particular shade of pastel or whatever it may be. The work then you need to build up the concept through to supplies, through to canvas,
Yeah.
and then start the work. Whereas you can sit down with half an hour spare in your day and already get to work on a piece that just you lose hours in. You can really get lost in everything in that process, but it's very much you can take care of it as and when you get the time in your day, if that
Yeah.
makes sense. Whereas traditional very much, I think, would require so much more dedication, allocation, resource, and even financial to a degree as well.
Yeah. Do you think there's any advantages to traditional work, to the creative process? We'll look at other considerations of advantage to that, but
Yeah, I
do you
do.
to the actual creative process, do you think there's any benefit in having those restrictions where you have to figure it out and make the best of the situation once you've halfway through, for example? Do you think
Yeah.
that's an
Oh,
advantage? Or?
100%. I think it does because it forces you to to a degree make mistakes. Not so much actually. Let me rephrase that. It forces you to make decisions.
Yeah.
It's you are going to sit and look at your field and say, well, do I feel like I need to add even more blades of grass or flowers in here? But you've also got to make the decision and the understanding of the build up of it as well. Okay, well, I don't want to start at the front necessarily. I need to start at the back, make my way towards the front so that I can layer this content on top of each other. When we have so much flexibility with digital art, you can go, that's
Yeah.
okay. I'll slot it in behind it with another layer in a minute. And you almost lose the actual rules of art in a sense with the digital version because there's so much room for adjustment and change later on.
Yeah.
What about yourself?
I think sometimes when you've started and you've gone down an avenue and you get to a certain point with it and you're thinking something isn't working, I think if it were digital, you'd recrop it and reformat and transform into a composition that might be a bit more obvious. Whereas it's kind of wrestling with something that you're struggling with, that isn't quite sitting right with you, and trying to find ways to make it work, I think actually can be quite useful. Not having an easy cop out of being able to just shift it to another part of the canvas means
Mm,
that I know for me sometimes I've ended up with pieces of work that I had to go through a real pain barrier just to really, to get to grips with how can I turn this around? How can I figure out how to make something that isn't, I wished I'd done differently if I were to start again, but I'm not got the luxury of that. So how am I going to make it work as it is? And I think
mm.
that can teach you some useful lessons creatively. Anyway, in terms of other examples or other ways that the digital art tools, might be an advantage. Can you think of any other things about digital, for example? We'll start with that give you an advantage over traditional.
I can immediately jump to one tool that I see everybody use that I don't utilize enough myself, which is flipping the canvas horizontally.
Right.
Flipping horizontally can it's mental. I when I see other people do it as well, it's so obvious when they do it. They flip it horizontally, and something just stands out immediately. There's too much lean to the right, or there's too much. Your subject is not in a spot that complements the adjacent side, or
Mhm.
something like that. And I don't do it enough in my own work, and I think sometimes it's through fear that Christ, I've done all this work and now I've flipped it. Yeah, let's just carry on down the direction we're already running in and hope no one sees it. So flipping the canvas actually horizontally to me is a
Yeah.
huge benefit, just because I urge people to do it in their work. If you get a chance, try and do it. You can flip it back, and it just reveals so much to your eye that maybe you just weren't seeing initially. So there's one from me. What about another one from yourself?
I think if you are an artist who sketches with pencil, and then been able to, even if you've not drawn directly into Procreate or digital drawing, if you've done it on paper, well, you can photograph it, and then put it in as a layer,
Mm-hmm.
in digital, and therefore you're working from the original composition with the lines exactly where they should be. The canvases that the uh, oil canvas that I showed you at the beginning started as a pencil sketch, but I had to use an overhead projector to project it onto the canvas, and even just that process, because it wasn't completely um, level with it, it distorted it slightly. Just slightly projection at a slope changed it, and then the digital version was slightly less distorted than that. So I think being able to put the pencil drawing in as a layer, and then work over the top of it, or even use the multiply blend mode so it becomes kind of transparent, and you can turn the opacity down on it so it's there but barely, and then you can just delete it as a layer later on. Whereas I think traditionally, if you start with a pencil sketch on your canvas, then sometimes you've got a real challenge just to try and remove it, if nothing else. But you've got the translation process. Whenever I've done a pencil sketch on paper and then I've tried to transfer it to canvas, somehow it loses something that made it work. It has less of the magic somehow that the original pencil sketch did. Sometimes there's an alchemy in that first time that you summon up this idea on the page, and then when you try to do it a second time, even if it sticks really close to the lines, if it's a little bit off, it can change it just that little bit, and it can lose it. And so I think being able to work with your original drawings in digital as a layer, I think is a massive advantage. There's lots of advantages. I mean, layers themselves are a huge advantage.
I was just I was almost going through the whole app in my head as you were talking and being like, there are dozens here. There are so many, and I guess that's just maybe progression, or just the fact that as the mediums move on and into different spaces and in different worlds, you developers will go, this is a bit of a bugbear, really. We could probably do with fixing this or adding something to make that a little bit easier. And before you know it, we end up with the tools we end up with. I mentioned earlier the curves tool and being able to change like your midtones and your highlight tones to whatever vibe you want. You can change an image drastically. I mean, the images that you've provided, the red one, if that had that would have a completely different vibe if it was a very darker, less red in there, but more blue toned. Just it would have a completely different feel to it, almost a nighttime vibe with glowing elements in there. So we could probably go through loads of different ones. Like you say, layers is probably the most valuable element in there because of just not being in a situation where you could potentially destroy some work underneath. And being able to move freely and have full adjustment. I cannot say it enough when we talk about layers. It's just, I'm looking at you, the viewer, right now. Utilize your layers. Make as many layers as you can. Please make as many layers as you can. I do it excessively, and I know I do, but I guess that's because I've only ever been in the space to a degree that with layers that I want to utilize them so much for just massive amount of freedom and adjustment later on. Layers is key.
I agree.
Layers is absolutely key.
I think layers is probably the most valuable part of the digital format, isn't it?
What about the other way around then?
Remind me, what was the question in terms of like?
Well, it was the benefits of digital. We spoke about the benefits of digital in terms of the tools available. What about traditional? And I'm gonna chuck one straight in there, and it's the satisfaction of the equipment that you use. For example, if you are using an extremely fine line, very long brush, and again, I've not done too much, but if I'm honest, that every week that we speak about traditional, it comes up in some sense. I want to go out and just go to Hobbycraft and buy a bunch of stuff and just spend an afternoon painting. But a fine line brush, I can even appreciate it when I see like a TikTok video, for example. I've got a bunch of brushes in a bag down there on the floor, actually, paint, etc. as well, for a project that I'm working on for the channel, which we'll utilize those traditional, but the satisfaction that you get from a paintbrush, even when you're painting your house and you're cutting in, that's satisfying. The feel of it.
There's a kind of meditative element, isn't there, with traditional? But I also think that happy accidents happen more with traditional paint too. With digital, I mean, to a certain extent, if you're using, I don't honestly remember a time where I've had a happy accident digitally though. Whereas I definitely know I have with traditional work, where something just seems to just happen in a certain section, and then that inspires you to do more in that way. But I don't think that really has happened much in digital work at all. It's been much more deliberate.
Would you say your happy accidents don't come in the sort of final process of things anymore? It's in the exploration part of digital where you want to draw a tree or a plant in a certain way, you'll maybe run through the brush library and the brush studio and find and experiment with different brushes and say, well, that one works. Well, actually, no, that one doesn't. And that's where I, to a degree, maybe you have your happy accidents.
Perhaps I think there's something about traditional work where I think you did, for me personally anyway, I would tend to be more reflective on what I'm looking at in front of me, because if you just go full steam ahead with traditional work, um, then you're more likely to blaze past something that looks good.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in digital, it doesn't matter, you can go too far and think, oh, that's not working, I'll go back. Whereas with traditional, I think that you kind of, it's more of an interaction with the medium. So something happens and then you can go, oh, that worked, and then I'll respond to it immediately rather than forging ahead with what my intentions were.
Mm.
And it's a fine line. And so, if you're using something like watercolor paper with acrylic paints or watercolor paint, and it splodges and it spreads and it does its own sort of pulls in certain areas and creates a strength of pigment in one bit, and then fades out in other areas. You're not really in control of that, and that has always been interesting. I've done that a few times with really thick, large sheets of like watercolor paper, and just gone really chaotically at it and let it do its own thing, and that has been inspiring in terms of responding to what's there in front of you, because it feels important, even though you've not been in control of it. Somehow you know that it exists in the world, and it only exists in the world because you poured some paint and water together. Whereas
Mm-hmm.
it feels less consequential when you do that digitally somehow. I could talk myself out of doing any digital work during this podcast. No matter the upshot or the end of this is like, no, not doing digital anymore. No, it's not. It's not. I love both. But there's definitely something that's a magic that occurs with traditional materials and the process. I think that you tend to stand back and look at it, and it exists in the real world with you, and I think that it gives you a more of an interaction with it in a way that on the screen just doesn't.
Mm.
I think it's interesting. Should we move on to another topic? So, in terms of sharing projects, um, how do you feel that? I mean, do you have much experience of? I mean, obviously, we're sharing this project into the podcast, but in terms of actually sharing pieces of artwork and that kind of a project, have you embarked on collaborative pieces, digitally or otherwise, at all?
Digital wise, more in my profession of
Right.
like app design and app development or website, you potentially hand, PSD or some sort of file or format over to someone, and they'll work their magic
Yeah.
and their expertise through it, and you get something back completely different. So more in the kind of professional sense in that way, where you need someone's um, viewpoint on something.
Yeah.
In a traditional way, I guess that's quite a tricky thing to do now.
Yeah. I have
Because
done I've done this as years ago when I was more in my student days. I don't even remember what's it called now? Something the exquisite corpse thing. That's not what I'm about to speak about. But have you ever done that surrealist game where you've got a piece of folded paper and someone draws a head, and then they fold it
yes,
and they give you a little bit, and all you can see is the connective bit, the neck, and you
hmm
imagine the shoulders, and then the next person doesn't see what you've done. By the time you open it out, you've got this weird kind of monster usually. But there's been other times we've been working in a surreal way in terms of like automatic drawing where you haven't got a preconception of what it's going to be. And I would start it and then I would hand it over and they would give me in turn what they'd started. So it could just be a doodle initially.
Oh, James, you got my head absolutely just. I've left the room for a minute now because all I'm doing is just thinking that's a really good collaborative style YouTube project where we draw a canvas with a stencil, like just a stencil layer only, and you get to draw 1/4 of it,
Yeah.
and then I'd crop the stencil into a quarter and give you 1/4, and I give Flo a quarter, and I give Kay a quarter, and then we bring them all together and see what we came up with. Oh, blimey!
Pencil
Let
that
me
one
write
in.
that one down.
Yeah.
That's a really cool idea.
But the idea
Even
of
just half
like
and half.
being able to sort of it does work, but you kind of have to be in the room, and that's the reality of it, isn't it? Whereas there's been I've done that in traditional where you swap it backwards and forwards a few times until the image kind of resolves itself some way. It looks like a half complete image at least. I've done it digitally, and I've done it with an artist who I got chatting with on Instagram. I think they were somewhere in the US. I forget where now exactly. I apologize if they're aware of this podcast in any way. But that was a really interesting project. So it was basically the same thing, where I would start my own image and they would start their image, and then a few days later we'd swap files. They were unfinished starts of images, and then we'd continue to work into them, and then we'd swap them back, and then we'd do that a few times until we felt that it looked resolved, and that was good. Um, it was a little bit more frustrating in as much as that you can radically transform something on digital and it can become something you didn't intend at all. Whereas I think people would be a bit more reverential when it's traditional, rather than people going, "Well, you've done this, and I'll do this thing," adjoining it and next to it and connected to it. In digital, people go, "Well, I'm going to flip that and turn it upside down and distort it and do all sorts of weird things to it." So it worked, but it was a good process. It was a good process, and
But
it's
I guess to
easier,
a
isn't
degree
it?
with digital, it's almost like collaborative art in a sense is a whole different conversation, which maybe we can discuss at some point if we crack on with the idea that I was just noting down. But collaborating in a way sometimes can be, it's just the battle of two minds to a
Yeah,
degree. And like, especially if you want to go down one avenue. I mean, we've collaborated on a few things, even just the branding of the
yeah,
channel, and you really do have to sort of take into in what I'm trying to say is, in our worlds, in our channels, etc., you are the lead. You do whatever you want on your channel. You can put whatever you want up. You draw
it's
what you
true.
want each week, and so on. But when we collaborate on this channel, for example, you bring in the other perspective, and it's actually fascinating to understand how the mind actually processes that when you're so used to one thing and being like, okay, cool, yeah, let me take into consideration how they've gone about it. So in an art, actually completing a canvas, even a traditional one, you could almost feel like that could be abusive to the
Yeah,
work that you've done and
yeah.
crafted because of the duration, especially that you've put into the actual piece as well.
And also, you've not lost anything. If you had a digital file that you've worked on and then you've sent them a copy of it, well, you haven't lost the original. Even if they
True.
go ahead and obliterate what you liked about it, you still got the original one. Whereas you hand over a canvas to someone and they slap a load of garish colours on it and you hate it, well, it's lost. There's nothing you can do about it. So yeah, I think it makes the kind of collaborative projects, I think, a little bit easier. But having said that, there was something pretty awesome about the risk of it. And I think, like I was saying, you tends to push you to be a little bit more reverential with what the other person has actually created. You can't just destroy it. So you've got to respect it and work in and around it, and
Mm.
try and enhance it in a way. So that in some ways, working traditionally, I felt probably created better outcomes. I think I enjoyed that process a little bit more. But anyway,
That's cool.
but in terms of technology and how it shapes the future of art, I mean, let's not go into AI on this episode. We've done it too many episodes, haven't we? But in, but in terms of how it might steer art styles and art production, do you have any thoughts about how technology might be shaping art of the present and perhaps even the future?
To be honest, no. At the
No,
minute, no. I mean,
could go
other
anywhere at
than
the
the
minute, couldn't
obvious
it?
two letters that we've spoken about, it's almost like Voldemort round here. You're not really meant to say it.
No.
But no, not really. And I think that it's one of those things where something can pop out of nowhere that will just completely change your perspective on the whole concept of whatever it may be. You think prior to the iPhone coming out and that whole, you know, I've watched the iPhone release of when they did the keynote, and when you see Steve Jobs just zoom in like that on a photo and the crowd go nuts, you look at that now and you think, what? That's just common like
Yeah,
navigational
yeah.
skills that we're so used to. But at the time, it was insane. So what do we think is next? With the Vision Pro being the sort of lead, I guess, with the technology at the minute. we've spoke about previously, like the future of Procreate and how that could be shaped, whether it's digital classrooms and we're all collaborating in a space together, which takes it kind of backwards in a sense of joining up together in a location in the virtual world and then collaborating, but kind of to a degree face to face or goggles to goggles. What about yourself?
I think it will change the way that I think it has changed the way that people create. I think that it, in terms of touching on things we already discussed, I think it enables people to create a lot more content. It's a lot faster, so people will race through ideas a lot more effectively than they would do traditional. I think it also makes images slightly less valuable to people aside from AI. I think even just before AI existed, I think digital in a lot of people's minds has a more throwaway quality to it. And I think part of that is, and this is one of the topics that I was going to move on to anyway. So let's just blend the two in terms of like the tactile experience of traditional work. There's something about the smell, the touch, although you shouldn't perhaps go around, putting your grubby fingers on people's work. But, but even just to look at it and be able to just look at it from the side or from a slightly varying angle, to know that there is a texture there and you could touch it. Your imagination tells you what it would feel like, even if it was behind glass and you're not allowed to touch it. Whereas digital work never has a texture. It never has. You will never use, even when someone has used watercolor effect, and it looks like, for all the world, like, oh yeah, it looks like what it doesn't though. And not really. I think if you actually see a watercolor in a frame and you look at it close, you can tell. It's not a print. It's not digital. It really has water has sat there and it's pooled in a certain way, and you know what it would feel like instinctively just by looking at it. You can use your imagination to know. So there's something very different about the way I think we engage with traditional work that is obviously by necessity missing in
And it'll
digital
only get
work.
worse.
Yeah.
We're only going to lose even more. I mean, the only thing you have at the minute is pressure sensitivity on a glass screen. And yes, we could integrate one of the many, screen covers out there to simulate paper, but that's as far as it goes. And if we move to a VR version of that, do you just hold your fingers up and draw in thin air and you don't have any feedback at all? Nothing at all? You're just going to lose more and more of it, which I constantly have this kind of thought process where people are loving going backwards to a degree. There's certain cameras that I see that I had when we were kids, or even a little bit later, that people are buying now for hundreds and hundreds of pounds, and because they like that vintage vibe and the rawness of it, and not being able to tap on it and change the exposure in through the viewfinder of your phone. It's just raw, and you take the photo, and that's it, and you get that flash effect, and it looks amazing. And I can appreciate it. And it's like vinyl as well. People going back to vinyl as well. There's something about having that physical media. And when I want a blend between that. And I think potentially that's where we're lucky enough that at least with the pencil on the iPad screen, you get a little something. You got a pencil to hold to a degree, which replicates that kind of organic feel to it. But I can only see it getting worse. But then potentially people then saying, right, I'm now at a crossroads. Which route do I want to go down today? And each one of them will be as appealing as each other. Now it's just digital. Do I pick my iPad up because I'm sat on the sofa? Cool, that's fine. But I think it's almost as kind of, right, I've got to get up and do something to put your headset on, go into a VR world, as much as it is to grab a canvas, lay it out on your table, get your paints ready and your water, and go to go and do the same experience. So to me, I think you'll end up at, like I said, that crossroad, and pick which avenue you want to go down, and hopefully they're as appealing as each other, across the board, really.
So moving on, in terms of the environment, I mean, you mentioned all the materials there that you'd have to get out with, traditional work. Obviously, all we'd need to do digital work, I say all we need is rather expensive, tablet and Apple Pencil and program or app. But once you've got that, then you can be endlessly creative, and you don't need any more resources, do you?
Ooh, I guess it's an interesting one, though, isn't it? This one, because a Procreate, I think an iPad user typically has a very long duration.
Yeah,
Like, most people don't upgrade their iPads in the same way that they upgrade their phones. So a phone is typically 2 years. I think an iPad probably sits around the 5 year mark.
yeah,
So if you're spending £1,000 on an iPad, which obviously, let's be honest, is still a large amount of money, but averaging out at £200 a year,
true.
how much do you think maybe over 52 weekends, if that's how lucky you are to even have every weekend in the year, how much do you think you'd get round to painting and buying equipment and paints, etc.? And the value, would it exceed or would it be less? I guess it's something that depends on your availability to act on your craft, really.
It depends on why you're doing it. If you're doing it just for the pleasure of doing it, then yeah, I suppose once you've bought the iPad and the app and the Apple Pencil, then everything beyond that point, apart from the electricity of charging it, is free, isn't it? In a sense,
Mm.
you'd have to go through quite a lot of canvases, I think. And what did we say? What was it? A couple of £100 a year, or maybe not too many actually. If you are very productive and you produce, say, 5 to 10 canvases a year, the canvas plus the paint, I mean, it might be in a similar ballpark, maybe a bit more expensive for traditional,
Mm.
but then you'd find it easier to sell it, and that's the
That's
reality
true.
of it, isn't it? But if it's just for the fun of it, I suppose it's cheaper. But then there's also the environmental aspect of it. It's that becomes a difficult topic
Are you
in
talking
itself.
about the environmental impact in terms of the materials used to build the iPad, or in terms of waste?
All of it. I mean, I think there's a lot of waste with traditional material. In a sense, there's a lot of paint that just doesn't get applied to the canvas when I'm working traditional. I'll get acrylic paint out, stick it on my, my palette, and if I haven't used it, I'll try and wrap it up and I'll try and be careful, and then inevitably air gets in there and it all just dries out and it's wasted. But I don't know what the environmental impact. I mean, acrylic paint is essentially plastics, isn't it? It comes in plastic tubs, um, which you can be really good about and diligent and make sure they're recycled. But there's an element of wastage. But then you've got batteries that are, include elements dug up from mines in various parts of the world. That it's not good for the
Mm.
environment either. Is that I know that the iPad can be recycled and it can be stripped for its parts once it's gone past its use by date, so to speak.
But just in case anybody doesn't know about that, the best thing you can do with getting rid of your iPad, if you're going to get a new one, take it back to Apple. Just
Yeah,
take it back. They'll buy it off you, whether it be a small amount. And it's only going to probably equate to the same amount you get from any other kind of shop that you'd be able to trade them into. But if you take it back to there, they can recycle all of the content in there, even melt down the aluminium, which I know the Americans are probably upset about me saying
aluminum.
it that way. But melt it down and go again and put it into
And
future
sell it
phones
back
or
to you.
future elements of the phone. Yeah, you buy it again.
Yeah.
But yeah, that is to a degree the best thing you can do, for the fact that it will be recycled and to be put into future pieces of content as well, physical content in that space. But I don't know enough, if I'm honest, about the environmental impact of the resources,
No.
like you say, that are being sort of harvested, even the methods involved for the harvesting. So I don't want to sort of allude to anything that I'm not educated in, unfortunately. But in terms of what you just said about throwing canvases out, or paint that ultimately goes bad, or do you buy a color and realize, I don't really have a purpose for this, and it just sits in the drawer, and 5 years later, like you said, you just chuck it away anyway, and you never got any use out of it. That kind of that's it's also space, isn't it? Really, you need
Yeah,
a space in an environment and a studio or a
it's true.
garage or whatever it may be to house your canvases, to house all your equipment. Whereas an iPad, it sits on your desk. It doesn't even need a desk. It can sit on your lap on
No. And
on the
also, I
sofa.
suppose it opens the possibility of sort of people that wouldn't have the space or the finances to do traditional work, doesn't it? They might have an iPad anyway because they use it for other things, and whilst they've already got it, they can also be creative on it, which
It's also the
opens the doors.
multi-purpose, isn't it?
Yeah,
It's like what else can you get out of it if you can put it in front of your kid and keep them quiet for an hour, that's priceless. So an iPad has even more value,
yeah.
and you can use it for multiple elements in your lifestyle, and watch a film, watch our show, watch everything else in between, and draw and
Because
game and everything like that.
one thing I've noticed when I taught in high school is there would be certain kids that they came from backgrounds where the parents would invest, and it wasn't the majority where they would be able to invest in art materials, and they would. I think it's probably perceived as more of a luxury to go out and buy canvas and paints and brushes, and they may end up with a result at the end of it. Whereas you'd be more likely to have kids in the classroom that they did have an iPad at home, because it was bought to occupy them. It was bought to watch Netflix on. It was bought because they've got various people in the house that want to watch things at the same time, and it stops the arguing. Blah de blah. So it's. I suppose it opens the door, doesn't it? Digital to it gives a much more kind of level playing field where you get kids or professionals, and as long as you have an iPad and you have a little bit of money, a tenner to throw at Procreate, or what, £12 or dollars, then I guess it allows more people to be creative, I think.
But are we overlooking the fact of the privilege of even just having an iPad in the
Of
first place?
course,
The expense involved in
it's
the
true.
initial investment just to get that started is probably a lot more challenging, that initial investment. Luckily, the canvas that you buy and the paints that you buy probably won't have as long a shelf life in your house compared to your iPad. The people that keep iPads going for, how long's the iPad even been out for? When was the first iPad released?
2010, I think it was.
So there's potentially people that have got an iPad that they're still rocking that's a decade old, if not more.
I can't believe
that. I bet you there's someone out there on
14 years
Procreate
old.
2.0 and they're really struggling to get by. I'm only laughing from the sense of just really saying, no, I'm getting every penny, every cent out of this
Battery
iPad.
lasts for 5 minutes at a time.
Yes, on charge all the time. That kind of thing. But you'll get way more shelf life out of the iPad compared to potentially the resources that you invest so much money into. I guess we're seeing it a little bit from a parent kind of view, aren't we? Of potentially saying, here's the equipment that you said you wanted and to use, and if you don't see that, almost a return, I guess, to a degree of seeing them use it and experiment and play and have fun with them, then it can be like, well, maybe we don't go down that avenue again, kind of thing. Whereas the iPad, they'll explore many different avenues, and they're free to do so as well. Mess around with the different elements, whether it's animation, and you could argue, okay, well, this isn't in our point, so I'm the one going rogue this week. Which one has more future in it? I'm going to use the specific scenario of a child playing, let's say in their teens, with they're either traditional, they've got both available and they're potentially skilled at both, but the iPad and all the possibilities that you can go down with that, whether it's sculpting 3D renders or art, animation, everything else involved, or the traditional one, which one has more of a future in it?
I think I would always advise people to learn traditional. I think that if you can do it with next to nothing, if you've got a pencil and paper and you can create, then you'll be able to translate that to digital. Whereas you may have learned all the bells and whistles within Procreate, but you can't apply that to a pencil and paper. So it's a one-way traffic. It works much better to go from traditional to digital than it does the other way. So I think in the classroom, I mean, when I was teaching, we did have iPads, but I would tend to use it as a way of extending their portfolio. So they would create something with traditional means, and then we could photograph it and we could manipulate it and create alternative color compositions and experiments on the iPad. But it wouldn't start with the iPad. We'd start with traditional materials. And I think, although you and I will take images from beginning to end in the digital format, I think that if you have a grounding in traditional, then it makes everything else a little bit easier. I think it's probably better generally to teach people traditional first. and then
Mm-hmm.
progress to digital. I think it works better as in that direction.
I agree to a degree, but I guess I'm looking at it from the kind of future prospects kind of
Mm.
idea. I know that traditional can feed digital a lot, but in terms of the world we live in now, and in terms of what we're seeing with Voldemort and AI and everything like that, like, is there more value in the world of content creation, being able to be more skilled in the digital space than there is the traditional? Does one feed? Does, to a degree, will traditional be able to feed into the world, the virtual world that we all live in, even in its current state, for much longer? You know, will its kind of value be far more valuable because it is a traditional and all the decorative content that you have in your house, rather than feeding into, you know, it's not going to feed into game design, is it? Because of
Mm.
the like we've already spoke about, the complexity of redoing it and adjustment. You know, that's just not feasible in that world. I know I'm just using that as a single example, but a website or anything like that, you know, we do need the options to be able to adjust it.
I
So
think
whether or not it becomes more valuable because there'll be less people doing it.
yeah, I think we're talking hypothetically here anyway. I suppose any person is not going to be faced with the real choice of having to do only one or the other, are they? But in an ideal world, then you'll have a grounding in traditional, at least to some extent, and then you can, even if just in your formative years, if before you reach the age of 7 or 8, you've done lots of pencil drawing, even just that alone would benefit you, I think, to be able to just
Mm-hmm.
manipulate marks on a sheet of paper, I think is a useful thing to do before you start working on a screen.
Yeah, fair enough. And then we've got to reflect, really, I would say, on our final point, is to reflect the emotional connection
Yeah.
viewers have with digital art versus traditional art. Because we've spoke about this loads of times, the craft that we always, I say this, maybe that's what our merch should say. It should be the craft, because I say it a lot anyway on this show, because to look at someone's painting, I can think of my grandparents and looking at them, and taking a look now at the age I am to look at it, digest it, and really break it down and take a look at every brushstroke. And if it's like oil paint and it's layered up on top of itself, you know, and thick, and you look at every stroke that got
Yeah.
involved to draw or paint whatever that is, there's so much appreciation and just like an admiration for it.
I feel to a certain extent it's a bit like, it reminds me of, I forget what it is now, but there's like fossilized footprints that have been discovered that are like thousands and thousands and thousands of years old, and you can walk on, I've not done it, but they've been discovered, and you would in theory be able to walk in the footsteps of someone that existed that length of time ago. And it is this sense of somehow a physical, almost sacred kind of recording of a moment in time, that it comes with traditional work, and it exists as an object, but it has a different kind of quality, that it is a tangible thing that was around. Like if you look at the Mona Lisa or any kind of classic painting in a gallery, just look. I think part of the wonder of it is that the age of it, and it's been around for hundreds of years, and
Mm.
I think there's something romantic in that. And I don't think it's nothing. I think, you know, I've argued the opposite of this in the past, where it's been like, well, the image should be the most important thing, and anything else is just, you know, adding a layer of mysticism to the sacredness of the object. And I do get that, and I think it's right that if the image is strong, like we've discussed previously, that you may never have had the privilege to go to the Louvre, to go to France to see the Mona Lisa, but
Have you
you've
ever been?
I have. I didn't actually get as far as the Mona Lisa. I looked around the Louvre, but I've seen other examples of like Turner's work, who I've always loved, um, and to be in the same space, to exist there, and to know that you stood looking at it, a couple of feet away, or a few. You can go really close up to his paintings, and to know that his eyes would have been locked on it in that little detail that you're looking at, in the same space, and it is romanticism, but I don't know. It's different. It is
Do you think
different.
when he was right up close, said, "Right, I don't want to get lost in the details. Let me back out and step like 50 foot
There's
backwards
that
and take a look"?
Gaussian
Because I
blur.
was saying
Yeah.
that. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, there's maybe I'm going on a tangent here because of what we were talking about. When I went to the Louvre and I saw the Mona Lisa, when I reflect on that now, it's almost it's got this weird value that is
Yeah.
not the value of what it is
Not
anymore,
the
if that
image.
makes sense.
Mm.
It's that I went to Paris and I saw the Mona Lisa. It's not
Yeah.
take a look at this piece, because I remember being in there and you turn around and there's canvases. I don't want to exaggerate the scale of them, but they're bloody enormous.
Yeah.
They're like 20-foot size canvases, corner to corner,
Yeah.
if not larger. And you just look at them and go, how? And now when I think about it, and if I was there again now, in terms of the age I am now and the experiences now of that I've got, I would just look at those more. I'd be
Yeah.
like, how can you? It's almost like when you get a work project and it's too big and you think, where do I start? But to be able to look at that and go, right, I'm gonna do this horse and it's going to equate to 0.5% of the canvas today, and then I'll carry on tomorrow. And you're like, that to me scream like, not just because of the scale of it, but just the dedication, the love, the commitment, the drive to keep going with a project that big and that detailed is just, it's mind blowing to me. But the Mona Lisa has it's like when you see people go to Greece now, don't you, a lot, and they go to what's the one with all the white roofs, Santorini,
Right.
and it's just become this horrific tourist trap where coaches turn up, everybody are like cramming onto tiny streets trying to get the photo opportunity and then walk away. It's not any more about the location and anything like that. It's the Instagram post. And maybe
True.
I'm 31 now and it drives me nuts when I see all of it, because I know that it's not like anybody anymore. Like, God, it's not like anyone anymore. Like I say anymore, we'll go to just a map and be like, right, we're going to travel down this way and we'll just see what we see along the road. It's more of the content that you can get out of it. I'm going on a hell of a tangent. I apologize, but there'll be people in the comments being like, yeah, Joel's right. Joel's absolutely right. But yeah, it's, I don't even know where we were anymore. I think it was the emotional connection between digital art versus traditional art.
But it's interesting, isn't it, that you would go to a gallery to look at paintings that are hundreds of years old. I wonder how many people will be as reverentially looking back at digital art that's 200 years old when the time comes. It may well be that people are. Will they be looking at the kind of the Bored Ape images and, as if there's something really special? What will be the digital artwork, if there is any, that people look back at? I don't know. It's hard
That's
to
crazy, isn't it?
understand, isn't it? What the future of the impact it has culturally, and how people will look back on it in if it matters, and maybe it doesn't matter ultimately.
Well, will Procreate be around in 100 years from now, and the channel still be making ad revenue money on the side for your great grandkids? Who knows? Maybe some of those big videos that you've got, for example, continue long into the future to make more and more views. The ones, the Procreate, essentially you search Procreate tutorial and the initial list really that come up.
Yeah.
How many of those how long is the shelf life of it? I don't really know. But I guess for the people creating the content, like following our tutorials or drawing their own content, maybe it's more of an appreciation of like being able to quite accurately pinpoint where you were in your journey in art as a whole, and being like, I remember being here. It was 2018 and I was drawing and I'd only just got to grips with this concept. And now 5-10 years later, I can see that, if not further ahead, and say, I've really come a long way. So maybe the love of it is because
it's good for your personal kind of development, but
yes. But in terms of generally,
culturally,
I don't know how much the content's going to get as much of, again, because I just think it's the craft part of it. I think people, a lot of the general audience of people will go, oh, wait, how did you draw that? And you go, oh, it was on my iPad. Oh, yeah, anyone can do that, kind of vibe. Whereas you see a canvas and you go, yeah, it took me
People
1,600
can
hours.
relate
And
better, can't they?
they go, yeah, and they can understand why I wouldn't be able to do that. And just because maybe it's the equipment to a degree that makes it feel a little bit more relatable. Oh, you can draw what you draw on an iPad. I've got an iPad. And immediately it's the kind of, well, I could probably do that because I've got that stuff. Whereas maybe when the thought process of being painting on a traditional canvas,
Perhaps.
go, no, I can't do that. Absolutely not. I couldn't do that. But because it's something as simple and so like accessible as an iPad, it changes people's perception. Maybe, I don't really know.
So how do we summarize
all I'm
the whole
saying
discussion?
Is I want my tutorials to be viewed in 200 years from now and people go, wow, he was great. That's what I want. How to summarize it?
There isn't a clear winner.
There isn't.
In one way,
I don't think it needs a winner. I think they have their places, and they will continue to have their places, as we mentioned, as the future of art changes and progresses into a completely different realm. And if anything, they may even have their value boosted for exactly what it is, the love and the craft of really getting into the nitty gritty of your canvas. Like you said, the smells, the organic feel, the brushes, the feedback, and everything that goes into that on your canvas. I think that is ultimately where we're going to find maybe a bit of a bit more rekindling of the love for traditional art a little bit more once you see the complete polar opposite turn.
I think AI will assist
10 years
in that.
From now. Oh, James, you said it now, aren't you? You said that we're not meant to say that. That's the rules. We tried to stay away from this topic for so long. I don't think there needs to be a winner. What do you think?
No, I think just that. I think there's a place for both. I think that traditional has been around for such a long time that it's easy to understand its place in the kind of the context of the art journey that human beings are on. But digital is still relatively new, and it's hard to quite understand where it will be placed in another 100 years, let alone even 10 years. So I guess digital art is yet to be seen. It's exciting though, and it is democratized in the sense that anybody can give it a little bit of a go, even if they just know someone who's got an iPad, or they get access to one at school, which is pretty common these days. So I think it does allow people to play and to have a go. And I guess the future of it is unknown, but I think there's as much fun to be had potentially doing digital work for people. And I think that's where we're coming from, isn't it? I think for our audience, it's about the pleasure of creating and seeing something magically appear on the digital canvas. And so I think we'll say digital is the winner. That's our format, isn't it? So that's our audience. So.
We're in big trouble if you go the other way. So let's move on then, as we normally do, to the tutorials that we released in the last week. First in the dock is your autumnal design. Talk me through your latest tutorial on YouTube and your extended version.
Sure. I just wanted to do more autumn pieces, really. They won't be the last that you'll see in terms of this autumn theme. Another structure, a little bit more complex than last time. We've got more windows. We've got more infernos, but whatever. We've got
people still saying that. People can't still be saying that, surely.
No. But you made I was only when I watched the episode from last week back that I clocked that you'd referred to it. I'd missed it in the moment.
Do you know what? Yeah, I know. I thought, oh, we're gonna get off air, and he's gonna go like, why did you mention the Inferno? I thought you might be a bit like frustrated by the comments. I'm thinking, that didn't go down well.
No, I didn't clock it. Enough. Unfortunately, there's a bit of delay sometimes when we chat, isn't it? Because we're different ends of the country and the internet and stuff. And in that moment, I missed that reference. But yeah, it's a common thing. But I don't kind of care. I like the intensity of the glow compared to in this instance, the kind of dullness of the colour palette to the rest of it. It's not that dull, but I like the pop of bright color and saturation and brightness of the glow of the windows. Yeah, so I just wanted to do something that was still autumnal, but with a bit more complexity on the structure, because I'm still trying to do the structure stuff as well. I really struggled
Nice.
with this one, I have to be honest. It was an example where working at the last minute really almost just fell apart at the last minute as well. Partly because we discussed this previously, but I use my iPhone to record, and it's an iPhone 13 Pro, which the battery is turned to. I'm not even going to use the word I was going to use there, but yeah, it just does not function at all. I can't get through the day using it, and the videos might take me. If it takes me 2 hours, then I'm coming unstuck now, because I paused the video halfway through just to look at how much time I had left, and it said I had like 30%, and I was nowhere near,
Wow.
70% finished. So yeah, that was a crisis. Thankfully, we've got more than one phone in the house, and ended up having to film the last bit on the other phone. But yeah, that
Wow.
was a bit of a drama, and then because the other phone hasn't got the HDR settings switched off. Then when I reviewed the footage, the HDR was super bright, and it's like, oh my god, how do I undo HDR now? I've filmed it all in. It just looked an absolute mess initially. And
Ugh,
anyway,
this is stressful to
yeah,
listen to.
and more to that, when you realise that your battery's about to run out, then you start to rush. You think, well, I need to get this finished, and so I
Mm,
was rushing elements of it, and so it's not exactly how I wanted it to look. More the leaves and the plants that are kind of like in the lower third, and the stone path weren't quite how I wanted them to look. And so I suppose getting onto the extended version, it gave me a little opportunity to go back and refine slightly. Um,
okay.
and rather than undoing some of the textures that I'd done on the ground with the leaves and the kind of the organic matter, I thought, well, I'll throw in some other elements. I'll throw in some stones that just break it up a little bit, so it's not huge chunks of the canvas that I'm not happy with. I can break it up. I can add some steps going up to the front door. I can make the stones on the path just lock together a little bit more better, so they're not just like potatoes all lined up on the path. They look like naturally stones that lock together a bit better. And then added elements like the leaves billowing around and a bit of rain. I noticed you did rain on, was it your last tutorial? I think you did rain on one of
Yeah.
yours. I've done it before
Yeah.
myself as well, but it just thought, yeah, okay, that would be a nice element to throw into the mix. So it's become a rather gloomier, more true autumnal, or I don't know what the word would be in relation to fall. I know autumn becomes autumnal, but I don't know what fall becomes anyway. Maybe someone from America knows how to give me the version to change it from autumn to autumnal or fall. Anyway, um, so yeah, I preferred the extended version. It allowed me just in a calmer place to go back to it and just fine tune it. I also made the chimney a kind of brick tone. I'm not sure that changed
Hmm.
enough to warrant doing that, but anyway, yeah, I'm happy with it. With a bit more time
It,
and a bit of a calmer headspace to refine it.
it's a
It all
real
worked out.
snapshot kind of design. The extended version. It's like a photograph's been taken in a moment in time, with the
Yes.
leaves falling where they are across the screen, and so there's movement there that you've
Yeah.
captured. The blur on them is really cool as well. I'm guessing you did like individual blurs per leaf there, because the motion blur looks like it's going in different angles and direction.
I did. No, I did two layers. So I did a layer of like the really distant leaves, the smaller ones,
Hmm.
blurred them in one direction, and did another layer for because it's the snow gum brush, and it just naturally creates a variance of shape, of
Okay, cool.
size and direction. Um,
Did you change spacing then in that one to isolate the shapes, like the individual leaves, or was it
I
just
did.
literally just
I
a
just
matter of
stretched it out.
pressure?
I
Yeah,
changed the spacing in the brush
nice,
settings to like 80% or something like that. So yeah,
nice.
it normally is the snow gum brushes are really clustered. All the little particles are really bunched together, so massively spread it apart. And it's a bit annoying because you tap on the screen and you can tap 10 times and nothing appears because it's, I don't know, it's putting a leaf outside the frame of the canvas somewhere, and so you have to keep tapping on the canvas, and eventually it'll put a leaf on the screen, and yeah. So, but yeah, we got there in the end, and a little bit of fine tuning and adjustment, and I'm actually quite happy with that. I didn't think I was going to be, but it turned out all right. So, how about your piece?
That's
You've got a
great.
real autumnal theme too. It's the right time of
Yeah,
year
I
for it,
think,
isn't it?
well, we all do this, don't we? Like in the space
Yeah,
where the sort of period of the year will ultimately define a lot of the content that comes out in that
yeah,
month, and so on, if I'm honest as well. So, yeah, an autumnal theme from me. I have no, I don't have I was going to say I do have a couple more ideas at the minute, but not anything in the pipeline yet for autumnal content,
yeah.
other than the fact that by the time this goes out, it's
Halloween
October. So,
encroaching. Yeah,
moving into all of those Halloween themed
yeah.
designs. So all of those oranges now start to come into everybody's mind, and all the leaves falling, etc. So, um, but so whereas you've gone down kind of it's an autumnal day, but it's very kind of wet, one of those like
Yeah.
days where you get caught out if you're not wearing the right thing for the day. I've kind of, I guess, gone down the route of those brighter days that
Crisp.
we occasionally get, and the brightness of it. I said to you in a previous episode that you have a really good knack of using quite nice saturated colors, and I tried to also push myself a little bit to use some more saturated
Really nice
elements.
blue.
Nice blue, yeah, in the water, which looks just refreshing, and wherever it's come from in the distant mountains, and just bright tones, the reds as well, and I think I'm quite happy with the balance of it. This was the one that I think I might have previously mentioned is the rainforest brush to do the leaves on the tree.
Yes.
You've mentioned it multiple times in these episodes, and I thought this is a perfect opportunity to do so. And then just using a few texturized brushes, such as the sassafras, which I just struggle to say all the time when I'm recording. And yeah, the one thing I tried to do this one is to, especially in the background, just try to be really, really loose with it. In the mountains, the streaks across the mountains, just simple. I didn't want to put any detail into them. I wanted it to just be very free. And there's a row of or trees behind the main tree, the subject tree almost. And that was literally just using the brush to create the tops of them, and just like a row. And even to a point, there's some bits of orange there that almost to a degree look like they're floating. That I just wanted to summarize some trees back there, and I wanted it to be very kind of easy to look at, and in terms of be like, oh, I can do that, and it not look potentially challenging in any way. And then just drew in the tree like actual structures underneath, the actual trunks and the branches, with a couple of, I think, the syrup brush just to attach the top to the ground basically, and then just focus a bit more on the front end. I'd have loved to have your concept sometimes I really like in terms of how you run your YouTube tutorials into your extended versions, because this one I could have easily gone back into and put in like a bench there beside the river on the right hand side part of the green, and really could have dogs even running through here, and really small characters in the distance and stuff. That would be a spot that I could see us taking the dogs to, and trying to add the subject matter in there a little bit more. But all in all, very happy with it. Nice and colourful.
I like there's really nice green in there as well. I really like the full colour range, all the different oranges and yellows and the green, as well as the more muted sort of distant mountains. I think it creates a really nice sort of harmonious look. I like it.
It's definitely a little bit more towards that kind of less, how can I put this? Less like, the only way I can summarize this is less detailed. It's not got the if, for example, if I scroll back in our document to your one, the ground and the elements on the left and right hand side, they're very granular with the detail. There's lots of small elements in there, whereas this one is very much just like brush stroke heavy, to give the full concept. The one bit I love the most, and it's something I kind of stumbled across a while ago, there's the land's edge beside the water, and then you just do the green up close towards the edge, and then with some diagonal lines in like a brown tone, just dashes down towards the water. It just very easily creates the illusion that there's like land and rocky kind of edge to the land. And it's just a really simple technique, but I really love it because it's so quick. And to be honest with you, sometimes drawing like rock work along the side of like a piece of land can be quite time consuming. The different tones you maybe want to put in there, the staggering of all the rocks backwards, and what sticks out and what doesn't, and so on. So yeah, it's quite an easy, nice method to just very easily add some content in there in the falling leaves as well, just to add a bit of motion. So I think we had a few different crossover ideas collectively across our tutorials, really, of like the falling leaves and the autumnal kind of style. But yeah, I love it when we can get into this period of the year where my mind goes October, cool,
Yeah.
autumnal, Halloween, those orangey tones, and then I get into like mid-November, and I go, right, let's move into those snowy,
Christmas.
wintry scenes.
Yeah.
And then by the end, you end up with the festive kind of scenes in December. So for me, I always
January
think that,
that's
like,
tough.
yeah, January stuff, because what do? Just draw like muddy puddles everywhere and just like beating down trees, everything's brown and grey. And well, for us anyway, obviously the Aussies,
if you live in LA, maybe not. Yeah.
But sometimes when it's January though, and I do like, I don't know, sunny scene, for example, I'm always thinking, oh, maybe that's what people want because they're looking forward to summer coming around again. But maybe it's different for us because we're in the UK. Maybe some parts of the world, even though it's winter, it's still, it's just t-shirt weather, not, it's just jumper weather rather than t-shirt weather, maybe it's not quite as grey and bleak and just British.
It is nice here. It's lovely in the UK, but the weather's not always lovely, is it? Unfortunately.
Yeah, that's it. Well, what a great episode talking about the battle between traditional and digital. It's always an ongoing one, and hopefully something that we can see the progression of and evolution of as well going forward. Yeah, that's it. End of another show. Thank you as always for a great conversation. It's always a pleasure. And as always, if you want to support the show and you're enjoying the content, the only thing and the best thing you can do for us is to subscribe to the channel. The best thing you can do for us. It shows your support. It helps grow the channel and also send the content out to more and more people. So we greatly appreciate it if you'd subscribe to the channel. I think we need to set like a new target or something. 2,000 subscribers by Christmas. By Christmas. Or else maybe we delete the channel. No, we won't go as risky as that. And that's the best way you can support us. We'll be back, of course, next Tuesday. So we'll see you then. Bye for now.